All right, let's dive into Genesis. We're not just skimming the surface here. You gave us quite this stack of excerpts. Looks like you want to go deeper than just the usual stories.
Yeah, definitely. Genesis has been interpreted in so many ways over the centuries, but today we're digging into your specific excerpts, seeing what they can tell us.
Okay, so starting at the very beginning, the 7 days of creation. We all know the basics: light, darkness, separating waters. But one thing always kind of jumps out at me. God creates humans in the divine image before the seventh day of rest. It's almost like, all right, humans, you're here now. What are you going to do with this incredible creation? What do you make of that placement?
It's way more than just an interesting detail, right? It's like a foundational concept. By putting human creation before the Sabbath, Genesis is saying that humanity's purpose is like deeply tied to creation itself. We're not just meant to enjoy it. We're supposed to be stewards, caretakers, partners in this ongoing work of creation.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not about like ruling over creation. It's about responsibility, a deep connection from the very beginning. And then we move into the Garden of Eden. It's described as this paradise with a river flowing out of it, splitting into four headwaters: the Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. There's even gold, resins, gemstones. It's so vivid. But is this all symbolic, or is there a geographical reality behind it? What would the original audience have made of these details?
It's fascinating, right? The Tigris and Euphrates especially, they would have been instantly recognizable to people back then. These rivers, I mean, they were the lifeblood of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. By grounding the garden in a real geography, even if it's embellished, the story becomes much more powerful. It connects this mythical paradise to the real world, suggesting that paradise wasn't like some far-off place. It has roots in the very landscape they knew.
Right. Oh, I see. So it's playing with this idea of a lost paradise, something that was once attainable, maybe even part of their history. Okay, so we have creation, we have this idyllic garden, but then we get the creation of woman. And the language here, well, it's definitely interesting. She's described as a helper for man, a helper who is perfect for him. That word helper has caused, well, a lot of debate over the years. How do you understand the original Hebrew? What does it say about the intended relationship between man and woman?
The Hebrew word that's often translated as helper, izer, it doesn't actually have that subservient feel that we might think of today. It's a strong word. Actually, it's even used to describe God as Israel's helper, their rescuer.
Okay, so not about hierarchy then. It's more like partnership, mutual support.
Exactly. And the word for perfect, kenegdo, it suggests completeness, like a fitting counterpart. It's not that one is superior to the other, but that they create a harmonious whole together.
No damsel in distress here. More like a power couple, right? Okay, well, Paradise Lost is a familiar theme. We get the serpent, the forbidden fruit, and, well, the fall. But there's one thing that always gets me, Tell. God asks Adam and Eve, where are you? I mean, God is, omniscient, right? So what's the purpose of that question? Is it just about their physical location?
It goes much deeper than that. Think about it. They're hiding because they're ashamed. They've become aware of their nakedness. God's question isn't about finding them. It's about prompting self-reflection. It's like God saying, you made a choice. You stepped outside our relationship. Where do you stand now? Where are you in relation to me, to yourselves, to the world you're supposed to be caring for?
Not hide and seek, but confronting the consequences. They realize, oh, we can't hide from this. And then come the curses: pain and childbirth, toil and work, return to the dust. But there's this often overlooked detail. God makes clothes of leather for them. Why leather? Is it practical, or is there a symbolic meaning there?
Well, you know, in ancient cultures, leather was often linked to sacrifice. Animals were sacrificed, and then their skins were used for clothing. It's about covering, protection. So even in this moment of judgment, God is still providing for them, showing care. It's acknowledging their vulnerability, their shame, and giving them a tangible way to cover themselves.
So not just clothing their bodies, but also their exposed souls in a way. And that act of sacrifice, even this early on, kind of hints at a deeper theme that will unfold throughout the Bible. Okay, so from the garden, we move on to Cain and Abel, the first siblings, and they definitely set the bar high for sibling rivalry. Cain offers his crops, Abel offers his flock, and God favors Abel's offering. Jealousy, rage, and, well, murder. But the language God uses with Cain is so strong. The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. That's not just a statement, it's an image that really gets to you. What do you think is the impact of that personified blood crying out?
It's chilling, right? The image of Abel's blood crying out, it doesn't just show the horror of what happened, it introduces the concept of blood guilt, this stain that can't be easily erased. It's an idea that will echo through legal and religious traditions for, like, forever.
Huh.
The land itself becomes a witness to this crime. The ground is imbued with this cry for justice.
It's like violence has this ripple effect. The consequences, they linger, they stain the earth, they demand to be heard.
It also speaks to the idea that life, especially human life, has inherent sanctity.
Mm.
It's not just a property crime. It's violating something sacred.
Right, and then we move through the genealogies, those intricate family trees that set the stage for all the generations to come. And one thing that just blows my mind in Genesis of the lifespans, we're talking hundreds of years. Methuselah lived to be 969. Imagine the birthday parties. But seriously, how should we understand those incredibly long lifespans? Are we supposed to take them literally?
Well, there are lots of different interpretations. Some scholars think they represent a different understanding of time, a way to express this vast historical scope. Others see it as symbolic, maybe reflecting how close humanity was to God in those early days. It's one of those enduring mysteries that invites us to look beyond the literal, to think about the deeper meanings within the story.
Okay, so maybe not literal birthday candles for every year. It's about conveying this epic scale, the grand sweep of history unfolding. And then we get to Noah and the flood. God sees how wicked humanity has become and decides, well, to wipe the slate clean. Only Noah, his family, and the animals are saved in this ark, which is like a microcosm of creation itself. But after the flood, there's this detail. God smells the pleasing aroma of Noah's sacrifice. Why include that sensory detail? Is it just about a barbecue?
Smell was a powerful thing in the ancient world, especially in religious rituals. The aroma of a sacrifice was believed to carry prayers and intentions up to heaven. This pleasing aroma, it means more than just a nice smell. It represents Noah's offering being acceptable to God, a sign of reconciliation after this devastating flood.
It's like a reset button, a fragrance of peace after a period of brokenness, a reminder that even in judgment, there's this yearning for restoration. And speaking of resets, we have the Tower of Babel. It feels so relevant today, don't you think? Humans, we have this impulse to build, to reach for the heavens, to achieve greatness. But God responds by scattering humanity and confusing their languages. Is it just about the sin of pride, or is there a deeper message there?
The story has resonated for centuries because it taps into these basic questions about ambition, unity, and the limits of what we can do. The Tower of Babel, it's a cautionary tale about hubris, overreaching human ambition, but it also shows the beauty and complexity of diversity. By scattering humanity and creating all these different languages, God is, in a way, encouraging cultural richness, a tapestry of different viewpoints and ways of being.
So it's not necessarily punishment then, but redirection. Acknowledging that human unity can't be forced, it has to be based on something deeper than bricks and mortar.
Exactly. And it makes us ask, what really unites us? Is it language? Is it ambition? Or is it something more profound, something beyond our earthly boundaries?
A question we're still asking today. Okay, so from this gathering, we focus in on one man and his incredible journey. Abram, later renamed Abraham. God calls him to leave his homeland, his family, everything he knows, and travel to a new land, a land that will become his descendants' inheritance. That's a huge leap of faith. What does this story tell us about faith, about obedience, about trusting a promise that seems impossible?
Abraham's journey is the essence of faith, a willingness to go into the unknown, leaving behind everything familiar, because of this conviction that something greater is waiting. Remember, he lived in a world where family, land, inheritance, that's what mattered most. To leave all that behind, it took immense trust in the promise, a belief that God would provide, even when he didn't know the way forward.
It wasn't just about Abraham's journey either. It was laying the foundation for a whole nation, people who would carry this covenant. And speaking of covenants, God establishes a unique sign of this covenant with Abraham, circumcision. It's a physical act, a mark of belonging, but also a deeply symbolic ritual. Why do you think this specific act was chosen as the sign of this covenant?
Circumcision, in many ancient cultures, was a rite of passage, a sign of entering adulthood and responsibility. But here, it signifies something deeper. It's a physical embodiment of that covenant relationship, a visible mark that sets Abraham and his descendants apart as God's chosen people.
It's like saying this isn't just a verbal agreement, it's written on your body, a permanent reminder of the commitment, the bond between God and this new nation.
Speaking of commitments, God promises Abraham and Sarah a son, even though they're way past childbearing years. And their reaction? They laugh. Sarah even tries to deny it, but God sees right through her. What's going on in this exchange? Is there humor here or something more profound?
I think there's both. They're grappling with the seeming absurdity of the promise, their human limitations clashing with divine possibility. God's response, "No, you did laugh," suggests that he understands their doubts, their struggles. It's not condemnation, it's acknowledging their very human response to this incredible, maybe even laughable promise. Like, God is in on the joke, saying, "I know this seems crazy, but trust me, you won't be laughing when that baby arrives." But after that lighthearted moment, things take a darker turn with Sodom and Gomorrah, cities known for their wickedness. And we see Abraham's character shine here. He pleads with God, bargaining to save them if there's even a small number of righteous people. He starts at 50 and keeps going lower, stopping at 10. Why stop there? Why not keep pushing for fewer?
It's a glimpse into Abraham's heart, his unwavering faith, his compassion, even for those who seem completely lost. He's wrestling with justice and mercy, trying to find the right balance. Why stop at 10? Maybe it's a threshold for him, where he recognizes just how bad things are. Or maybe he's acknowledging his own limits, knowing he has to surrender to God's ultimate judgment.
Like he's saying, "I've done all I can, pleaded for every possible soul, but ultimately the decision is yours."
And that surrender, recognizing human limitations in the face of divine justice, is a powerful theme in Genesis.
A reminder that even our best efforts, our most fervent prayers, they can't always change the course of events. Sometimes we have to trust that God's plan, even if it seems harsh or confusing, is ultimately for the best.
And sometimes letting go is the hardest act of faith.
That's a powerful thought to leave us with. And on that note, we're going to take a break and let those ideals sink in. But we're not done with Genesis. We'll be back soon to dive even deeper into this ancient text, the stories that continue to shape how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
Welcome back to our Genesis deep dive. We left off with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, a pretty stark reminder of what happens with unchecked wickedness. But even after something that intense, the story still doesn't shy away from, well, the complexities of how humans behave.
Yeah, it's like Genesis is saying, okay, you think that was intense. Just wait. Things are going to get even more complicated. And I can't think of a better example than the story of Lot and his daughters. They're hiding in a cave thinking they're the only ones left alive. And then they make this decision that, well, let's just say it raises a lot of questions.
It's a really disturbing part of the story, no doubt. The daughters, they're driven by fear, right? And wanting to preserve humanity, so they get their father drunk and, well, they have children by him. It's definitely a story that makes us confront the darkest parts of human nature, the lengths we'll go to when we think it's all on the line.
It's one of those stories you just can't ignore, even if you kind of wish you could. And it makes you wonder, how would the original audience have understood this? Was it a condemnation of incest? A warning about desperation? Or something else entirely?
It's hard to say for sure. But one thing to think about is that this story goes on to explain the origins of the Moabites and Ammonites, who later become rivals of the Israelites. So maybe it was also understood as an origin story, a way of explaining the complex relationships between these different groups.
So even in its most unsettling moments, Genesis is still setting the stage for this bigger historical narrative. Every story, every character, every little twist and turn, it's all connected to something larger. But let's move on to something a little less disturbing. Abraham and Sarah pull the "she's my sister" routine again, this time with King Abimelech. You'd think they'd have learned their lesson the first time around. You'd think God would be losing patience with this whole deception thing.
You'd think, right. But even the most faithful people are still human. They make mistakes. Abraham's deception, maybe it's just a reminder that we're all capable of falling back into old habits, even when we know better. It's a human failing that, it happens in every time and place.
Like they say, we're all works in progress. And sometimes that progress is, slower than we'd like. But amidst all this human fallibility, there's a glimmer of hope. Sarah finally gets pregnant. She gives birth to Isaac, the long-awaited son of promise. It's like all those years of waiting, all the doubt and laughter, it finally leads to this miraculous birth.
It's a moment of pure joy, a testament to the power of faith, to God's faithfulness. But it also sets the stage for another conflict. Remember Hagar, Sarah's maidservant who had Abraham's son, Ishmael. Well, with Isaac's arrival, the family dynamics get a lot more complicated.
Oh, yeah. We've got Sarah demanding that Hagar and Ishmael be sent away, and Abraham is stuck in the middle, torn between his love for both his sons. Classic family drama, right? All the jealousy, rivalry, heartbreak.
And it's important to remember the cultural context, too. Back then, the son born to the main wife, he held a much higher status. He was the one who would inherit everything. So Sarah's fear for Isaac's future, even as it seems off to us now, it would have made sense back then.
So it's not just personal jealousy then, it's about societal expectations, all that pressure from tradition. And while God reassures Abraham that Ishmael will also become a great nation, it's clear that this separation, it causes real pain and division.
Absolutely. And this tension between Isaac and Ishmael, it foreshadows the conflict that will happen between their descendants, a conflict that will actually shape the region for centuries. It reminds us that even within families, even within God's chosen people, there can be rivalries and divisions that have these long-lasting consequences.
And speaking of consequences, we come to one of the most difficult stories in Genesis, maybe even in the whole Bible, the binding of Isaac. God tells Abraham to take Isaac, his beloved son, the son of promise, and sacrifice him. I mean, what kind test is that? What's the point of such a horrific command?
It's a story that has bothered people for centuries, and rightfully so. The idea of sacrificing a child, it's horrifying to us. But we have to remember the historical context. Child sacrifice did happen in some ancient cultures, so maybe this story is a critique of that practice, a way of challenging what was considered normal back then.
So it's not condoning child sacrifice, but using it to make a point about true faith and obedience. But it's still really hard to understand, right? Even if it was a test, even if Abraham didn't actually have to go through with it, the emotional impact must have been immense.
Absolutely. And it makes us ask, what are the limits of obedience? When do we say, no, this is wrong, I can't do it, even when it seems like God is commanding it?
It's a question we're still facing today in all parts of our lives. When do we follow orders and when do we say enough is enough? But before we get too lost in the ethical questions, let's move on to a slightly less intense episode, Sarah's death and burial. Abraham buys a cave and some land from Ephron the Hittite, and this becomes the family burial site, which, it'll be a big deal later on.
Buying the Cave of Machpelah, it's not just a real estate deal, it's symbolic. It's about claiming a place in this land. It's a burial site, yes, but it also shows Abraham's faith, his belief that this land, the land God promised, will one day belong to his descendants.
It's like he's planting roots, both literally and figuratively, in this land that still feels so new to him. And that sense of belonging, that connection to the land, it'll become a central theme in the whole story of Israel. But before we get to the Israelites, we have another generation to explore, Isaac and Rebekah. Remember, Abraham sends his servant back to his homeland to find a wife for Isaac. And he finds Rebekah at a well. It's like a scene from a romantic comedy. He's totally smitten with her kindness, her hospitality, and of course, she turns out to be the perfect match.
It's a lovely story, a bit of lighthearted matchmaking amidst all the drama, right?
Yeah.
And Rebecca's character is so strong. I mean, she's willing to draw water, not just for the servant, but for all 10 of his camels. It tells you a lot about her generosity, her strength. She's clearly a woman who takes charge, not just a pretty face.
Definitely wife material. And their story reminds us that even within these big epic narratives, there's still room for love, for connection, for those simple human joys. But as we all know, with Genesis, the drama never stays away for too long. Isaac and Rebekah have twin sons, Esau and Jacob. And before they're even born, we're told they're fighting in the womb.
Ah, yes, the rivalry between Jacob and Esau. One of the most fascinating sibling relationships in literature. And it all starts with that struggle in the womb, like a preview of the conflict that will define their lives.
It's like Genesis is saying, get ready, folks, because this family drama is about to go into overdrive. Esau, the older twin, he's a skilled hunter, an outdoorsman, while Jacob is more, introspective, more of a homebody. And then one day, Esau comes in from the field starving, and he makes a decision he'll totally regret. He trades his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of stew. Talking about a bad deal.
It shows you so much about both of them. Esau, he's impulsive. He wants instant gratification, so he doesn't value his birthright, the privileges and responsibilities that come with being the firstborn. But Jacob, he's more cunning, more willing to seize an opportunity, even if it means taking advantage of his brother.
And that sets them on a path of rivalry, deception, all these shifting fortunes, stolen blessings, family feuds, and a whole lot of wrestling with destiny. But we'll save all those juicy details for the final part of our deep dive. For now, listener, I'll leave you with this. What does it mean to you to inherit a blessing? Is it about material wealth, a spiritual legacy, or something else entirely?
All right, welcome back to the final part of our Genesis deep dive. We left off with Jacob and Esau, those twin brothers whose rivalry, well, it started even before they were born. And things are about to get, let's just say, very dramatic.
Oh yeah, the drama's just getting started. We've got deception, disguises, a stolen blessing that sets off this whole chain reaction that'll last for generations. Right. So Isaac, he's getting old, his eyesight's fading, and he wants to give his blessing to Esau, his firstborn son. But Rebecca overhears this and decides to, well, intervene. What was she thinking? Messing with a patriarchal blessing? That's like a really big deal.
Remember, in their culture, the firstborn son, he didn't just inherit wealth, he also inherited this spiritual legacy, a leadership role in the family and the tribe. Rebecca, for whatever reason, she believes Jacob is the one who deserves that blessing. Maybe she thinks Esau is too impulsive, he didn't care about the birthright. Or maybe it's just a mother's love, wanting the best for her favorite son.
It's a fascinating part of the story, isn't it? They're not just like flat characters. They're complicated people with their own reasons, their own flaws. So Rebecca comes up with this plan. She dresses Jacob up as Esau. She even puts animal fur on his hands to make him feel hairy like Esau. I mean, the audacity. And then she sends him in to trick his own father. Does it work?
It works perfectly. Isaac can't see well, so he has to rely on touch. He's completely fooled. He gives the blessing to Jacob, thinking it's Esau. And when Esau finds out, oh, he is not happy.
Oh, I bet. I can just picture it, the shouting, the accusations, that feeling of betrayal. What happens next? Does Esau try to, get revenge?
Oh, absolutely. He's furious. He swears he's going to kill Jacob as soon as their father dies. Rebecca knows things are bad, so she sends Jacob away to her brother Laban in Haran, hoping to keep him safe from Esau.
So Jacob has to run for his life. He leaves behind everything he knows. It's like a whole new adventure, a journey into the unknown. And this is where he meets Rachel, right? Falls head over heels in love, ends up working for her father for like 7 years just to marry her.
Exactly. Jacob's story is full of surprises. He gets to Haran, meets Rachel it's love at first sight. But then there's another trick, a classic bait and switch. On his wedding night, Jacob realizes he's married Leah, Rachel's older sister.
Wait, seriously, he works for 7 years for Rachel and then he gets Leah instead. That's rough. What was Laban thinking?
Well, back then, you had to marry off the older daughter first. Maybe Laban didn't want to let Rachel go. Or maybe he saw a chance to get twice the work out of Jacob. Whatever the reason, it definitely adds to the family drama.
So sibling rivalry with the brothers and now sibling rivalry with the wives. It's like everyone's competing for, a position, favor, who's on top. Didn't Jacob end up working another 7 years for Rachel? So basically 14 years for his 2 wives.
That's right. And from those 2 wives and their handmaidens, we get the 12 sons who become the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. So this messy family drama, it's not just about personal conflicts. It's actually laying the groundwork for a whole nation, people who will continue the covenant.
It's amazing how the personal and the historical are always woven together in Genesis. Every individual story, it's part of this bigger purpose, this grand narrative. But let's get back to Jacob. After all those years with Laban, he decides to go back home. Can you imagine how nervous he must have been? I mean, his brother basically threatened to kill him.
Yeah, it's a journey full of fear and anticipation. He sends messengers ahead with gifts for Esau, trying to smooth things over, and then finally they meet face to face.
Okay, I'm picturing this tense standoff. Does Esau, charge at him with a sword? Do they get into a fist fight?
Actually, it's a really touching moment. Esau runs to meet Jacob, they hug each other, and they both start crying. It seems like all those years apart, they softened Esau's heart. It's this moment of reconciliation, forgiveness, that shows how even the most broken relationships can be healed.
Wow, I was expecting a big fight, not a tearful reunion. Even in Genesis, with all the violence and betrayal, there are these moments of grace, of redemption. But their story doesn't end there, does it?
It doesn't. They go their separate ways, but their descendants, they'll keep interacting, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not, for centuries. The fact that they reconciled, it doesn't erase all the conflicts that will happen between their people. It just shows how complicated and long-lasting the healing process can be, both for individuals and for, whole societies.
Before we finish with Jacob's story, we got to talk about that wrestling match. The one with the mysterious figure. It's one of the most, puzzling and powerful stories in Genesis. Set the scene for us.
Okay, so Jacob's on his way back to Canaan. He's alone one night, and he ends up wrestling with this figure. It's not clear who it is. They struggle until dawn, and as the figure's trying to leave, he touches Jacob's hip, dislocates it.
Hold on, he wrestles all night, even after getting hurt. What's keeping him going? Why not just give up?
It shows how determined Jacob is. He won't give up until he gets a blessing. And this blessing, it's not about money or power. It's about a change in identity. Jacob recognizing his own strength, his resilience.
And the mysterious wrestler, a lot of people think it's an angel or even God. He gives Jacob a new name, Israel, which means he who struggles with God. So this wrestling match is like a metaphor for Jacob's whole life, his constant struggle, wrestling with both human and divine forces.
Exactly. And it sets the stage for the nation of Israel, people who will constantly be grappling with who they are, their relationship with God, their place in the world.
Wow, so from creation to covenant, exile to reconciliation, we've covered so much in our Genesis deep dive. As we wrap up this incredible journey, what are some key takeaways you want to leave our listener with?
Genesis. It's not just a bunch of old stories. It's this foundational text that explores the biggest questions we face. Where do we come from? What's our purpose? What's our relationship with God? It deals with the complexities of family, of society, this ongoing battle between good and evil. It's a text that keeps challenging us, inspiring us, making us think,
Yeah.
even thousands of years later.
And for everyone listening, I hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for how rich and complex Genesis is. It's a book that invites us to, really grapple with our own beliefs, our values, our place in this grand story of humanity. It's a story that, in a lot of ways, is still being written.